It's time for CWJah-Tube Comments Review number 3. As most of you know, I get a lot of comments on my videos, and I do my best to respond to as many as I can. Some are not appropriate because they're either offensive or they're just so low level. What you might consider dumb, right? Just nonsensical. So they're really not worth quality time. But some of them that aren't offensive but that might be dumb, meaning nonsensical, they're not the kind of thing you would expect someone to write because they're dumb, are useful to illustrate what we're dealing with, what I'm dealing with often on this channel, and I know some of you are dealing with when you encounter many of these same types of people elsewhere. I don't like referring to people or their arguments as dumb, but I'm not the one coming to my channel and publicly posting things that sometimes there's no other way to describe but dumb. I mean, I could come up with other descriptions, and I have, right? I've invented an entire category of person. Spiritual retards. People who aren't, actually physically, mentally retarded, but who in a spiritual sense demonstrate what people in a physical, mental sense are when we talk about people being retarded or disabled. Spiritually retarded people, as I really outlined in detail in my Bible and the Trinity and Conflict series, parts 1 and 2. Part 2, we had a demonstration. We had many spiritually retarded people engaging me actively while I was live on that video to show us all really what, in one sense, I'm talking about. People that can't help themselves, right? When, as I explained in that video, when we see a mentally disabled person in public, we want to help that person, or at least let them enjoy life while they're being handled and being managed by people who are there to take care of them. But in a spiritual sense, there's not much we can do when people are the equivalent of physically, mentally disabled people and just start yelling at us or acting irrationally, right? And you can't communicate with them. You can't even have basic conversations because, there's something wrong with them. So we have to, at some point, trust in Jah, trust in the Father, trust in the Son, right? And just, they're the spiritual handlers of people who are like that, who are either, potentially demon-possessed, or most often I find they're just irrational people. They have a problem. They're very narcissistic, or they have other personality defects, or a spiritual defect we can't fully categorize beyond, as I've tried to do, spiritually retarded, to try to explain why there are certain people that, while they seem normal, right? They can talk, they can actually put coherent sentences together, so that it's not beyond their ability to do that. They just don't. Or when they do, they make no sense whatsoever, openly defy readily available and provided information, right? It's right in front of them. But they can't see it, right? They don't recognize it. It doesn't compute, right? They're blinded. And that's another way of looking at spiritually retarded people. They're blind. There's a disability there, like in a physical, mental sense of being retarded, or blind physically, right? They can't see what's going on sufficiently to deal with it on a constructive level, right? And so in the book of Proverbs, we're told two different things when we're dealing with people like this. To answer a foolish person according to their foolishness, and we're also told not to answer a foolish person according to their foolishness. So it's really a judgment call, right? And I do my best to try to limit the extent of time because I just don't have a lot of time to devote to people who really aren't there to listen. They're not there to learn, or they can't, right? They're beyond my ability, no matter how hard I try to help. So sometimes, we're dealing with people and we want to try to help them. But there's nothing we can do. And so I do my best on this channel because I feel a responsibility to engage people more so than I would elsewhere, right? Because I'm posting videos and I have to deal with comments so they're not just left there to mislead people or confuse people. So there's a little bit more I have to do. And sometimes I'll just ban the person. Sometimes I'll engage the person. Sometimes the person will engage me a little bit, but then they'll just leave. Right? You'll see an example of that a little bit later on. When I do try to engage them and try to explain, they're not understanding what's going on while they're trying to talk to me. So they just get frustrated and give up, right? Not necessarily spiritually retarded, but certainly not spiritual people, right? They're not interested in learning, so they just come here, try to confuse or promote their view, and then when they realize it's not working, their evidence doesn't work, it's not credible evidence, it's bad arguments, they give up. Right? They're not here to learn. And so they just quit. So I try to deal with the different types of people that we have come to this channel according to the type of person that they show themselves to be. So I have several examples of people that I want to go over in our third episode of CWJah-Tube Comments review, starting with a comment I received on my John 1:1 Made Easy video. I'll go ahead and bring it up. It's a comment made on this video by a person who goes by the name of John B. John B, talking about John 1:1, or commenting on my John 1:1 Made Easy video, but specifically referring to my reference to the Greek term for God in relation to John 10:33, since I also discussed that in this video about John 1:1 Made Easy. John B writes, John 10:33 reads, theon, not theos. And this is because in the video, John 1:1 Made Easy, when I'm talking about John 10:33, I refer to the lexical form. When you have a lexicon, like Bauer, Arndt and Gingrich, or Liddell Scott, any lexicon, they use the lexical form, right? They don't list every single form of the same word when they're defining or explaining the meaning of the term. So the lexical form, like if you wanted to go look up the Greek term for God, you're going to find it listed in the dictionaries of Greek as theos. That's the term and the form that we refer to it in when we're talking about its meaning. Sometimes I will, and we all refer to the actual form used in the text, right? Like in John 10:33, you make yourself theon, right? It's in the accusative form because of its function in the sentence, but it's still the same thing as theos when it comes to the lexical definition of the term. Right? I'm not talking about the grammatical form or function of the Greek word for God in John 10:33 in that video. I'm talking about the fact that the term for God is being used in that text for what the Jews said Jesus made himself. The term for God without the article, which Jesus then goes on to defend by using Psalm 82. The same term, God, in the plural. But John B takes an issue not with my argument about the fact that Jesus responds to the Jews' accusation against him by referring to the plural form of the term used in John 10:33, from Psalm 82. No, John B. takes issue with me because I refer to the lexical form of the term, theos, because I'm not talking about its use in the accusative form as an accusative form. I'm talking about the meaning of the term, God or a God, which is what the term means, whether it's in the accusative or the nominative form in John 10:33. So I wrote back to Mr. John B. I know that, but theos is the nominative form of theon. When referring to a term for definition, we use the lexical form, not the sentence form of a word. Which is why you'll never find theon, the term used in John 10:33 because of its function in the sentence in the accusative. You'll never find that listed in a Greek dictionary because it's not the lexical form that you look up to get the definition of the term that's used in the accusative theon in John 10:33. John B. writes back to my explanation, how disappointing. He doesn't say what's disappointing. Is what I said incorrect? Well, we'll read about what John B. had to say further in a moment, but he just writes, how disappointing. What's disappointing, John B.? That you don't understand? That people refer to the lexical form of a term regardless of its function in the sentence, when that's not the issue at hand? When we're talking about the meaning of the term? What's so disappointing about that? That you were exposed for using a terrible, dumb argument rather than actually respond to my argument about Jesus' use of the plural form of theos in his response to John 10:33? Is that what's so disappointing to you? Because it shows your view of God and Jesus as God is incorrect? Otherwise, if that's not it, I guess you're just disappointed in being educated. So I wrote back, true, I am very disappointed you don't realize that theos and theon are the same noun in different cases, and that we use the lexical form of a noun when discussing its meaning. Practically unforgivable. And you went public with it. Incredible. This is not something to be proud of, everyone. This is someone who's, I want to use the R word here, right? John is obviously not retarded in the physical, mental sense that he can't communicate because he's mentally disabled. He's putting words together. He's putting sentences together. But he doesn't understand some of the most basic information available and that I just provided to him, which he then responds as it being disappointing. So I'm not dealing with someone who's really capable of having a rational discussion here. In fact, look at what he says next. What's disappointing is that, right here, you clearly stated theos rather than theon in your presentation, only to turn and come up with lame excuses instead of admitting your obvious mistake, which is precisely why you are where you are today. True followers of Christ do not behave this way. By their fruits we shall know them. So Mr. John B. is disappointed I don't admit my mistake of referring to the word for God in John 10:33 in the accusative form, theon, and instead I refer to it as theos, which is exactly what you would have to look up in the dictionary when defining the term, precisely what I'm doing when it comes to that text. I often, and in fact, I always try to refer to the lexical form of a word. Again, sometimes we might refer directly to the form of the term used in the text, but almost everyone I know that's a Trinitarian and who studied Greek extensively understands that we refer to the lexical form of the word. I'm confident most Trinitarians who are comfortable with Greek would not agree with John B. here that I made a mistake referring to the lexical form theos when talking about the meaning of the term theon, which is theos, in the accusative form in John 10:33. I'm confident most, if not all, Trinitarians would not follow John B.'s argument here and would instead tell him, John, you might want to pick a different battle with Greg because that makes you sound kind of dumb. The fact that you don't understand using theos to discuss the meaning of the term theon, which is theos in the accusative, in John 10:33, is quite appropriate. Instead, John B. insults me, only to turn up with lame excuses. It's a lame excuse I have to explain to John B. that we don't always use the form of the term in the text, but reference its lexical form. That's a lame excuse, according to John B., and an obvious mistake. And then he goes on to tell me that's precisely why I am where I am today. And then he implies pretty explicitly, I'm not a true follower of Christ because that's where I am today and I don't do things the way he wants them done. And he's a true follower of Christ who doesn't behave that way. And then he says, by their fruits we shall know them. So John B. is here essentially saying, I'm not a Christian because I won't admit a mistake that's not a mistake while he's making a terrible mistake. And he doesn't even understand what he's talking about. He thinks it's a mistake worthy of being a non-Christian or not a true follower of Christ. He thinks it's a mistake of that kind to refer to theon in John 10:33 when discussing the meaning of the term theon as theos. He thinks that's by your fruits you will know them. And that I am not admitting it's such a terrible mistake, all the while we all know there is no mistake. It's actually quite common, and it shows competence and understanding of the lexical form of the term under discussion, which John B. does not accept. This is what we're dealing with, everyone. These are the kinds of people that are left, trying to promote the Trinity using this kind of argumentation. It's incredible. So I wrote back 2 comments at the bottom. True followers of Christ do not attack other people when they do something correct. You're an idiot, and he is an idiot, if not spiritually retarded like those who attacked me in parts 1 and 2 of my Bible in the Trinity and Conflict series, because he's showing stupidity here. He's commenting on something related to Greek, like he's supposed to understand something about Greek, and he doesn't. It's dumb This is what the term dumb, stupid, spiritually retarded, idiot, this is what all those terms are for, right here, for this kind of interaction with this kind of individual. Just read the book of Proverbs and you'll see that John B. falls right in line with the use of those terms. He's an idiot. He's spiritually retarded. I explained to him in clear language exactly what I was doing, using the lexical form of the noun. There's no difference between theos and theon when it comes to what does the term mean. Okay, we do need to understand its use in the sentence, which I do. I discuss it. But we're talking about what the term means. And that's very common when doing so to refer to its lexical form. So I explain, after pointing out that he's actually acting like an idiot, anyone arguing theos versus theon like you have done here is so far gone, you're not coming back. You have another Jesus, right? He has a Jesus who rejects someone like me because he says I'm not a true follower of Christ. He's judging me, right? He's already determined I'm not a true follower of Christ because I refer to the lexical form of a term when discussing its meaning, which doesn't change because it's in the accusative form in John 10:33. He's accusing me of not being a true follower of Christ because of that. That's how much judging this person is comfortable doing. Condemning someone else and saying, Jesus wouldn't pick me as a follower because I use the lexical form of a term I'm discussing. So how could he have the biblical Jesus, right? He's not only incorrect in the whole point he's making, that it's an issue at all. To make an issue out of this, you have to have a problem, right? You've got to either be spiritually retarded or dumb on some level. I'm sorry. I don't like to do that. I explained that earlier. But there's a whole book called Proverbs, as we all know. And this is the kind of thing it often describes. Answering a fool according to his foolishness. Not just a fool, a judging fool, a condemning fool. Someone who says I'm using lame excuses and not admitting a mistake, and that's where I am today, not a true follower of Jesus, because I'm actually doing something that's correct, that's commonly done, that he just doesn't understand. Like John 1:1 or John 10:33. So I say he has another Jesus, right? He's condemning me. There's no way he could have the Jesus of the Bible that says, do not be judging people. Right? Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. It's explicit, yet he does it right here over something that just makes him look stupid. And that one, that is his Jesus, is found nowhere in the Bible. Good luck with your false doctrine and idiotic view of nouns. I will be sure to highlight your insanity to everyone. It's truly the worst example of anyone commenting I've ever had. It really is. Right? This is the bottom. We've had some doozies, right? I mean, there might be some that are on par with this, but this is the lowest level of engagement you could possibly have with someone. Arguing with you while discussing John 10:33, the fact that they claim that Jesus is calling himself a God or God, using theos in the accusative, and then discussing the term by referencing its nominative form listed in all Greek dictionaries. This is the bottom. Right? Anyone who would take issue with you on a subject like this, I'm discussing it here to point out the obvious. They don't have anything. They're done. Right? This is all they have. No argument about the whole video's discussion of John 1:1 or John 10:33 in the context and Jesus' use of Psalm 82. No, it's about using theon versus theos. This is the bottom, everyone. This is as low as it gets, and that's why I'm using it as an example in this comments review number 3. I concluded by stating, so here we have someone intellectually bankrupt when it comes to discussing nouns, offensive in attacking someone else, and claiming they are not a true follower of Christ for properly discussing a biblical text, all while using a profane term. He had used that term in another comment, the term ass, and alleging towards someone else, by their fruits you will know them. Awesome. No thanks. So he had used the term ass, claiming I was trying to cover my ass by using the argument about the lexical form. It looks like, in fact, that he edited his comments. If you look at it, we all do, right? I edit comments sometimes because I make mistakes here or there. I added one comment here because I used attach versus attack. But it looks like he took out the term ass that I quote in that last comment down here. He actually had used that right here, and he took it out where it says, come up with lame excuses he had originally wrote to cover your ass. So I appreciate that, John B. I actually have your original comment. I copied this version of it yesterday, but I have the original comment that shows cover your ass. Still, I appreciate the fact that you edited out the profane term that we don't need to have in comments like these. But you still said that I used lame excuses and didn't admit my obvious mistake, and that I'm not a true follower of Christ, and by your fruits you'll know them, over theon versus theos. Incredible. Let's move to our next comment, which involves my Michael and Jesus as the Biblical Archangel, Part 8. A comment was made to that video by Gabriel Konkowski. And he stated, hi, I don't agree at Hebrews 1:5 clearly says to which of the angels is my son. Also, he meant Matthew, but he wrote Nat, Mark, Luke, and Mark, and not one word about Jesus' preexistence. I wrote back, and this is what's so incredible, everyone. In the very video that he's commenting on, I discuss Hebrews 1:5. It was like one of the main points of Michael and Jesus as the Biblical Archangel, Part 8. In fact, look at the top. It includes Hebrews 1:5 in the title. This person writes, hi, don't agree at Hebrews 1:5 clearly says to which of the angels. That was the whole point of me including Hebrews 1:5 in that video, was to discuss the very point this person's making in objecting to the video that discusses the point he's making. So I write, I address Hebrews 1:5 in this very video and in another separate video in my Bible and the Trinity in Conflict series. And you say nothing in response. You also appear to omit John from the list of gospel records. Why is that? Because it openly refutes you. You see, they like to point out or claim that Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't refer to Jesus' preexistence, which is not true. But it's like when they say that, is John not in the Bible that you read? Did you take John out of the New Testament? So if his preexistence is all over the place in John, what's your problem? What's the point of referring to Matthew, Mark, and Luke not teaching his preexistence if you accept John and he teaches it explicitly in numerous texts? You see the level of argumentation we're dealing with? Not only someone quoting an argument directly addressed in the video without responding to my discussion of that text in the video. They make an argument that doesn't follow even according to their own accepted texts, if those include John and other texts, right? Hebrews 1. I talk about it right here. First, I point out that with regard to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus identifies himself as wisdom in Luke 11:49 as he says the same things in Matthew 23:34 that wisdom says in Luke 11:49. Wisdom is pre-existent with God, Proverbs 8:22 through 30. So you are wrong on every single point. When you are ready to believe the Bible, let me know. And then I write below, further, Hebrews 1:1 through 3, right? I mean, he's talking about Hebrews 1:5 in his initial comment before making the lame argument that Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't teach preexistence when they do. At least in my response here, I show that Matthew and Luke do because they show Jesus as wisdom of Proverbs 8. He identifies himself explicitly in Luke 11:49 and Matthew 23:34 as wisdom. Wisdom is pre-existent, not only according to Proverbs 8, but a large volume of texts from wisdom literature in addition to Proverbs 8 that I list and cite in my appendix to my Jah Loves Her Wisdom, His Son the Word article I wrote about 10 years ago. And that will be an appendix in my coming translation of the book of Proverbs. But I point out that he refers to Hebrews 1:5, and yet Hebrews 1:1 through 3 explicitly teaches pre-existence with God creating through the Son, and Hebrews 1:10 through 12 again explicitly teaching the Son was in the beginning as he put things together, consistent with wisdom's role in Proverbs 8:22 through 30, as I've discussed in my video on that subject, and those texts specifically in my Bible in the Trinity and Conflict series, which is consistent with John 1:1 and Proverbs 8 and Matthew 23:43 and Luke 11:49. Yet somehow you missed all of this. Incredible. Right? I mean, you not only missed the fact shown in the title of that video and in the content of the video that I discuss Hebrews 1:5 and the very point that you make that allegedly claims that Jesus isn't an angel because Hebrews 1:5 says to which of the angels, which is not what it's talking about. I've discussed it. I discussed it in that video. I'm not going over it again. If you don't watch the video and you want to impale yourself publicly on the execution instrument of shame that you erected, so be it. That's your problem. These are the people we're dealing with, folks. These are the people I have to deal with, at least to a point. And I know you're all dealing with to some extent. It's incredible. They don't listen. They don't learn. They're not really here to learn. They're just here to repeat already repeatedly refuted arguments that are refuted in the very video they're commenting on. This is why I created the category of persons that are spiritually retarded. They can't learn, right? Just like mentally disabled people have a learning disability, right? They can't learn the same way. Spiritually retarded individuals are the same way spiritually. They can learn, they just don't. Not when it comes to the teachings of the Bible. Speaking of impaling yourself, let's go to our next comment, which doesn't necessarily involve impaling oneself, but being impaled or executed, crucified. On my Does Bible Prophecy Show Jesus Was Killed on a Stake or a Pole, Not on a Cross, Numbers 21, 8 through 9 video, I received this comment from G.E. Barber. It's still much more likely than not that Jesus died on a cross based on the Bible and archaeology and not pole stake. In the end, it does not matter, but for those who wish to make it a divisive issue, as Watchtower has, but descriptions of the T-shaped cross date back to the 1st century with the writings of ante-Nicene fathers like Justin Martyr and the Epistle of Barnabas. 2nd century archaeology finds depict the T-Christian cross. Historians themselves explains Romans practice crucifixion as a way to prolong time and pain till death and the length of time Jesus survived suggests he was killed on a cross in addition to the fact Greek stauros doesn't exclusively mean stake, pole, but cross. The Romans' choice of using a cross over a stake was apparently due to the cross being able to extend the time it takes a person to die. By staying alive for hours or days, the crucified person served as a warning example to others. First of all, you don't provide any information, not in this comment or in your next comments that we'll get to show that you would be alive longer or less long on a cross versus a stake. You just assume that that's a reason why, and you assume that the amount of time described in the Bible for Jesus better fits a cross. Well, you better have facts, because you don't have any at this point. And your initial comment right here, really this entire comment, we're going to talk about it. You say it's much more likely than not Jesus died on a cross based on the Bible and archaeology. But then you don't quote anything from the Bible, and you don't show anything from archaeology that talks about the Bible, or even the time of the Bible in the first century that we're talking about with regard to Jesus. So I wrote back. Here's the initial comment. We just read it. My two replies. Not according to prophecy, right? The whole video I just presented that this person's commenting on, who doesn't make any comment about the very subject that I'm commenting on. Numbers 21, 8 through 9, John 3, 14. Just as the serpent was lifted up by Moses in the wilderness, so too the Son of Man will be lifted up. If we make an exact correspondence, just as the serpent was lifted up, just as the serpent was lifted up, that more likely indicates, since a serpent isn't like this, but is like this, a pole or stake, not a cross. At least it implies that, right? I'm not arguing it proves that, but when we think of a serpent, it more likely is on a pole than on a cross. It's possible Moses made a cross and put it on it, but that's not the most likely form of instrument you would use for a serpent that's straight up and that kind of has a wiggly form, not an arms out form. So I write, not according to prophecy, which shows a serpent on a pole, not on a cross. Make that a little bigger. Nor from anything archaeologically dated to the first century. Right? He says up here, based on the Bible and archaeology. I'm talking about archaeology from the first century. I'm not talking about archaeology or even history beyond that period. And we don't have anything from archaeology from any other period close to the first century. But the two examples that I reviewed in my other video involving the cross, where it shows the feet were nailed on the side of the base of the pole, not over each other, as is often wrongly shown on a cross. What we do have shows most depictions of Jesus on the cross, those with his feet nailed over each other, are incorrect, like I just said. Now, where have you spoken out against the open use of idols or people praying in churches or homes with Jesus on a cross? Because he says here that those who wish to make it a divisive issue basically is the Watchtower and those related to it. He doesn't say anything about people who make an idol used in religious worship and prayer using the cross. No, he just attacks the Watchtower for rejecting people who use it in an idolatrous manner and who never point out that it could be a pole or a stake and always say cross or use a cross. So I ask him, where have you ever done that? He certainly doesn't do that here, just focuses on Watchtower. If nothing, then why are you speaking out against those who do not use Jesus on a pole or a cross in an idolatrous manner? And then I comment here, you wrote, I quote him here, Greek stauros doesn't exclusively mean stake, pole, but cross. He writes that right here. Greek stauros doesn't exclusively mean stake, pole, but cross. And so I say this is an idiotic comment for two reasons. No one here, number one, has ever said, not even the Watchtower, Stauros exclusively means stake or pole. We never say that. I've never said that. The Watchtower has never said that Stauros exclusively means stake or pole. So the person is just lying, misrepresenting me in the Watchtower and confusing other people. So it's an idiotic comment. That's why I said you've invented an argument for yourself and misled everyone into believing we or the Watchtower ever said this. You should immediately retract and apologize for this statement. Number two, Stauros does not exclusively mean cross, as your comment wrongly alleges. Right? Look at his comment right here. The fact that the Greek Stauros doesn't exclusively mean stake, pole, but cross. So what he's saying here is it's a fact that the Greek term Stauros does exclusively mean cross, right? But cross. And that's why I say, because it just sounds so contradictory, but that's only if you accept that that's not what he's saying, right? You almost, down here at the bottom, you almost seem to say two things in conflict with each other in one sentence. I'm not sure you're fit for this channel. Apologize and stop misrepresenting us, the Watchtower, and lexical sources, or you're banned. And the person subsequently unsubscribed and left the channel, did not respond to my comments. I did not prevent this person from doing that. They just left. They just abandoned the discussion. Although there were a few other comments before he did that we'll get to in a moment. But this is incredible, is it not? To argue that based on the Bible and archaeology, it was a cross, not a pole or stake most likely, and then not to cite anything from the Bible, right? He's in Justin Martyr, Epistle of Barnabas, 2nd century archaeology. That's not what I'm talking about in the video he's commenting on, or in my other video. I'm talking about the prophecy in the Bible, hence proof from the Bible, that Jesus resembled a serpent on a pole, not a cross. According to Jesus, John 3:14, quoting Numbers 21:8-9, or at least referring to that account. And then in my other video, I use archaeology from the 1st century, showing that the common representation of the feet over each other is incorrect, and that they were nailed from the sides, and so too also could his hands then be nailed from the sides above his head to the pole. And hence nails, like Thomas asked to see. One nail in each hand, just like one nail in each foot, nailed to the side of the pole. So there is no evidence. None. Not from the Bible, and not from 1st century archaeology, not from any archaeology showing crucifixion. We only have those two evidences from the 1st century that show the feet were nailed to the side of the pole. So the person does not understand archaeology and then just refers to the history of the use of different forms, the T or the cross. There were many different forms used. No one denies that. I've never denied that. And neither has the Watchtower. Yet this person alleges, essentially, that we do, and then uses the very type of evidence that we don't use, namely biblical evidence from prophecy and 1st century archaeology evidence, the only archaeological evidence we have of execution on a stauros, and alleges it's more likely a cross. This is what we're dealing with out here, people. It doesn't matter how much evidence we provide. It doesn't matter what text we reference. It doesn't matter what archaeology shows. They only want to promote their own view, even if it's incorrect and doesn't line up with the evidence, and then they just lie about us and claim we claim something that we don't claim. And by them, I mean me or the Watchtower in this case. Moving to the next comment that is a part of a series of comments this person made on this video. Another person had commented on another video that I wrote, the other video, the first video I did on cross or stake. Was Jesus executed on a cross, a stake, or a tree? So this person went from commenting on my video about Bible prophecy and whether that proves Jesus was killed on a stake or a cross to this video. And he replied to Sabrina Dobbins' comment, who really, that is Sabrina Dobbins, was basically saying it doesn't matter, right? We should focus on why he died, which I agree with, but I'm happy to discuss the evidence because we have some, right? We have evidence from prophecy and we have evidence from archaeology. And that evidence supports a pole or a stake, not a cross. Down at the bottom, G.E. Barber wrote in response to Sabrina, the only people who have really made it a contentious issue are the Jehovah's Witnesses who claim the Christian cross is rooted in paganism centuries after Christ, which is false from both archaeology, which points to a cross, not true, and logic itself. JWs are against a supposed pagan cross, but not pagan wedding rings or wedding cakes or wind chimes. So again, this person is misrepresenting what archaeology really supports, at least when it comes to the feet. And there's really nothing in archaeology that would tell us he was killed on a cross. But what we have to show from the feet provides a basis for showing how he could have been nailed on a pole or a stake, with both hands nailed to each side, just like the feet. Consistent with Bible prophecy, or at least what Jesus applies from what was done in Numbers 21 to himself. So G.E. Barber here is just attacking the Jehovah's Witnesses, right? He's attacking me. He's attacking Sabrina, at least in terms of responding to her comment in a way that, again, doesn't deal with her point that it doesn't really matter. He makes an issue of it. The very thing he claims not to really be interested in doing. Look at his first comments. The only people who have made it a contentious issue. Yet Sabrina is doing just the opposite. She's trying to say it's not a contentious issue. Right? I thought the focus should be on why he died, she wrote. Her first words, so does it truly matter how Jesus died? Does that sound like someone making it a contentious issue? No, it's G.E. Barber who's doing it. He's bringing up the Jehovah's Witnesses and their comments about it being involved with paganism. And certainly we do know that the Tau of Tammuz, does provide a pagan association. So what G.E. Barber is saying in criticizing the Watchtower is, again, not true. Now, whether or not he was killed on a T or a cross, does that make it not pagan? Wasn't it the Romans who used that form of the instrument, if true? Were the Romans pagan at that time? So even if it was a cross or a T, G.E. Barber, then it is associated with paganism. It was the Roman pagans who used it, not the Christians or the Jews. They don't even understand the implications of their own positions, everyone. This is incredible stuff. And then he goes on to misrepresent archaeology, claiming it points to a cross, which is not true, and logic itself, which is not true. And then he says JWs are against the supposed pagan cross, but not pagan wedding rings, wedding cakes, or wind chimes. So again, it's someone who's not connected with the issue under discussion and is just looking to attack Watchtower. So I comment further and state, this is that same comment we just read of his, only now at the top in this snippet. I wrote, wrong. Trinitarians openly idolize the cross and use it in their homes and churches and reject stake or pole, though where you are also wrong, cross has no first century evidence from archaeology, nor any evidence from prophecy. Stake or pole has both. Right? I'm not talking about all of the historical uses of a stauros, either centuries before Jesus was alive or centuries after. I know they used a T and a cross and other forms. I'm talking about the Bible. I'm talking about evidence from the first century. G.E. Barber is totally out of context, as you're going to see further in just a moment. But on this wedding rings and cakes, I write, wedding rings, wedding cakes, and wind chimes are not used as idols in religious thought or practice. Jesus as an idol and him on a cross, or just a cross, are used all the time in prayer, worship, and religious practice, showing those doing so walk by sight, not by faith, and openly admit idols into their presence, where the Bible warns us against doing so. 1 John 5:21, my little children, guard yourselves from idols. He doesn't say guard yourselves from wedding rings or wedding cakes or wind chimes or the calendar. We live in the world. We have to make use of things in the world. We don't have to make idols out of them, G.E. Barber. Why didn't you respond to my comment about that, G.E. Barber? Why did you leave the channel after making such a ridiculous comparison between the idols of Jesus and the cross used in religious worship and prayer versus wind chimes, wedding rings, and wedding cakes, which are not? Incredible, everyone. That's why I use these comments to show you what we're dealing with, because it's a lot. And we have a few more here. Let me show you this one from G.E. Barber first, just to show how out of place he is, which we've already shown. But he makes this extended comment, and these are all still on the videos, right? I mean, this massive quotation. Some of it may not be accurate, but in any case, he quotes the Journal of American Medical Association, March 21, 1986. He says, first, the actual evidence for the cross is abundant from both archaeology and the Bible, right? He's been saying this in all of his comments to both of these videos, and he's totally out of context. I'm talking about the Bible. I'm talking about the first century archaeological evidence, the only evidence we have of crucifixion or impalement. And he's claiming that we have abundant evidence from both archaeology and the Bible. Oh, really? Where? Because this comment right here doesn't refer to any archaeological evidence other than the evidence that I presented in my video, which is consistent with the Bible's comment about Jesus being lifted up like a serpent on a pole. He says up here at the top, in Jesus' day, there were many forms of impaling, with the cross being the most common form used by Romans. The reason Romans used cross was they perfected it as one of the most extreme forms of torture. Again, look at what it says down below. He assumes, with the cross being the most common form used by the Romans, that that's what they used in the Bible for Jesus, even though, as I showed in those videos, it refers to a xylon right before he carries a stauros xylon to Golgotha, with xylon in the preceding context, but very close to it, where they come after him with swords and clubs, for a club, a straight piece of wood. So even that, he doesn't comment on anywhere. We have the use of xylon, clearly referring to a club or pole in the Bible, which is also used to refer to Jesus' instrument of execution, along with stauros. We have Jesus being lifted up as a serpent without arms. And then we have archaeological evidence from the first century that shows that the feet were nailed on both sides of the pole. So what is he talking about when he says at the top, abundant archaeological and biblical evidence showing evidence of the cross? He's just lying. And his comment down here states, that it talks about Romans did not invent crucifixion. They perfected it as a form of torture and capital punishment. He says, he does an ellipsis here, so he's, I don't really trust this quotation here, but it doesn't matter because he doesn't understand the biblical or archaeological evidence. This is talking about history, the historical use of different forms of wood for crucifixion or impalement. In fact, it says right here, only later was a true cross used. Only later was a true cross used, after referring to the Romans perfecting it for crucifixion. It says it was characterized by an upright post and a horizontal crossbar and had several variations. Although archaeological and historical evidence strongly indicates that the low tau cross was preferred by the Romans in Palestine at the time of Christ, crucifixion practices often varied in a given geographic region and in accordance with the imagination of the executioners. They often varied, right? And there is no archaeological evidence of anything showing a T or a cross. The only archaeological evidence we have from the first century is exactly what I showed in my video about cross, stake, or pole. That the feet were nailed from the sides. We don't have any other archaeological evidence, let alone evidence that shows they were killed in the first century using a T or a cross. Historical evidence refers to many different forms, and even in this source cited by G.E. Barber, it shows there were several variations, and that only later, right here, only later was a true cross used after the Romans perfected it. So it's just a ridiculous quote here. He says right here, there are as many pre-Christian as there are post-Jesus references that indicate the cross was being used prior to the time of Jesus. I'm not talking about historical references to different forms of execution than the first century, which is the time of Jesus' execution, consistent with archaeological evidence from that time that shows the feet were nailed on both sides of the base of the pole, that he was lifted up as a serpent, and that Zilon refers to a pole or club. I'm not talking about all the different uses of Zilon or Stauros referring to different shapes of execution instruments. I never said it didn't have other shapes, including a cross. You're the one who misrepresented the evidence from history and from Greek lexical sources that shows that Stauros means more than cross, that it does mean stake and pole. You're the one who said essentially that it exclusively means cross, which is not true. So you perpetrated a falsehood while attacking a straw man and claimed that I'm misrepresenting the Bible and history? How's that possible? I'm only talking about archaeological evidence from the first century. I'm only talking about the use of Stauros and Zilon in the Bible and biblical texts like Numbers 21, 8 through 9, that Jesus applies to himself in John 3:14, that all point to a pole or a stake, not a cross. None of it supports cross. Not Numbers 21, 8 through 9, not Zilon used in the Bible, and not the archaeological evidence from the first century showing people's feet were nailed on both sides of a pole. And even if that pole was a cross, it doesn't show a cross. It shows only the feet and how they were nailed, which is consistent with a stake or pole, even if also a cross. So you really have no evidence from Bible prophecy, from the usage of the terms in the Bible, or from archaeological evidence. Yes, historically, Stauros can and did refer to more than a pole or stake. No one has denied that. So what's the point of all this? What's the point of presenting all this information that talks about the historical use of a cross or a T, and that only later was a true cross used, when all the evidence that really matters shows something different? It doesn't make any difference. So none of this has anything to do with contradicting my view of Bible prophecy, usage of terms in the Bible, Zilon and Stauros, and archaeological evidence for those who were put to death on a Stauros. None of this that you see on this page in any way contradicts what I'm talking about or what I presented. And none of it is abundant evidence from archaeology in the Bible pointing to a cross. It's just misrepresentation and historical references that are used in the place of actual archaeological and biblical information. Final comments on this subject of the cross or pole and stake. So this is the abbreviated part of that prior quote I just showed you. That's why it says read more right here. And so my comments in response to what we showed right here, this larger opened up form of this snippet right here at the top. This extent of a comment was totally unnecessary, referring to the prior comment, the extended form of this comment, if you hit read more. We can read. Just cite your source and summarize your points. Yet in all you just presented, you have not one single thing from archaeology supporting a cross in the first century. All there is later commentary on what was used, which included stake or pole, as all lexical sources defining Stauros show. So you provided a lot of nothing. Certainly not one single thing right here in the middle from archaeology. Yet he says the actual evidence for the cross is abundant from both archaeology and the Bible. Yeah, there are two sources from archaeology, and they both are consistent with pole or stake, and also show how the nails could have been placed above the head with a nail in each hand, also put into the sides of the pole or stake, not necessarily a cross. So you provided a lot of nothing. Okay, I read that. It makes me wonder if you even know what is archaeology, right? Because he keeps saying abundant from archaeology, yet he doesn't cite one single thing from archaeology. Whereas my video, I showed it the two pieces of evidence from archaeology that actually show what I'm talking about with the feet and what could have been true with the hands, and certainly is not in any way pointing to a cross. So what is he talking about? There is no other evidence from archaeology. It's the whole point of the video. That's why it makes me wonder if he even knows what is archaeology. If so, why do you keep saying we have evidence of cross from archaeology in the first century? We don't. So stop misleading people. Thank you. And my final comment before you left the channel was, again, no one is denying there were various forms of execution using various types of wood. What you are failing to provide is one, evidence showing Jesus was executed on a cross, not a pole or stake, which was also a mean of Stauros, and even more so the mean of Zilon in the Bible. And here's where I refer to that text where Zilon refers to a club, an actual straight piece of wood, exactly like we're talking about when we refer to Jesus, who was also killed on a Zilon or Stauros. So again, the use of the terms in the Bible, apart from Jesus being executed, don't point to a cross. They point to a piece of wood, a pole, a club, a stake. Text from Numbers 21 that Jesus applies to himself point to a pole on which was a snake. And archaeology shows, as I've said numerous times, the feet nailed to the sides of the base of the pole. In the very near context of Jesus being executed, that's where Zilon is used right here in Matthew 26:47. And 2, you ignore all of this and Bible prophecy, Numbers 21, John 3, all to support the least likely meaning of Stauros and Zilon. He says the evidence for cross is abundant, provides nothing from archaeology, nothing from the Bible, refers only to comments about the greater historical use of Stauros as different forms of this instrument. So he has nothing from the first century down at the bottom, not archaeology, nor prophecy, nor commentary, nor usage of Zilon or Stauros in the Bible, pointing to Jesus being killed on a cross. It's incredible, everyone. I can't believe we have people that spend this much time, from John B. to Gabriel to G.E. Barber. Everything they wrote is ridiculous. Yet they spent part of their life, their actual living existence, preparing and posting this stuff, totally ignoring, in all 3 cases, the evidence I provided on John 1:1, John 10:33, Hebrews 1:5, and on Stauros and Zilon from archaeology, the Bible, and prophecy applied by Jesus. They ignore it all. They don't comment on any of it. And they just repeat arguments that have been refuted by the very evidence in the videos on which they're commenting. It is incredible. And that's why I wanted to show this to you. But we have one more. We actually have a more positive comment that will give us something to review together. It's not all negative on this channel, of course, but we get some doozies, everyone. Boy, do we. Here, Mike Torino made a comment on my 144,000 video. What do you think about the parable of the vineyard workers in regards to the 144,000? Thank you for the work you've done. Well, I appreciate that, Mike Torino. It's nice to get a positive comment and a good question. So let's take a look at it together. Let's go ahead and bring up the illustration Jesus gave about the vineyard workers and see what we can say in answer to Mike's question in regard to how this illustration fits in with the teaching about the 144,000 in the Bible. The illustration, he doesn't give the text, but I'm pretty sure that Mike means the illustration of the vineyard workers in Matthew 20. Here, using the New World Translation, a not morally bankrupt translation that actually uses the divine name in most instances where it should be used. Sometimes in the New Testament, it uses it where I don't think it should be used. But in comparison to other translations, as I've talked about in other videos, it is far superior. So I'm happy to use it in reading the illustration of the vineyard workers. Matthew 20, verse 1. For the kingdom of the heavens, this is Jesus, is like a man, a householder, who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. When he had agreed with the workers for a denarius a day, he sent them forth into his vineyard. Verse 3, going out also about the 3rd hour, he saw others standing unemployed in the marketplace. And to those he said, you also go into the vineyard, and whatever is just I will give you. So off they went. Verse 5. Again he went out about the 6th hour and the 9th hour and did likewise. Verse 6. Finally, about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing. And he said to them, why have you been standing here all day unemployed? Verse 7, they said to him, because nobody hired us. He said to them, you too go into the vineyard. Verse 8, when it became evening, the master of the vineyard said to this man in charge, or to his man in charge, call the workers and pay them their wages, proceeding from the last to the first. Verse 9, when the 11th hour men came, they each received a denarius. Verse 10, so when the first came, they concluded they would receive more, because they'd been working longer. But they also received pay at the rate of a denarius. Verse 11, on receiving it, they began to murmur against the householder. Verse 12, and said, these last put in 1 hour's work, still you made them equal to us who bore the burden of the day and the burning heat. Verse 13, but in reply to one of them, he, that is Jesus in this illustration, said, fellow, I do you no wrong. You agreed with me for a denarius, did you not? Verse 14, take what is yours and go. I want to give to this last one the same as you. Verse 15, is it not lawful for me to do what I want with my own things? Or is your eye wicked because I am good? And then in verse 16, in this way, the last ones will be first and the first ones last. So how does this apply to the 144,000? Well, you know, if you've watched my 144,000 video, or if you've just looked up the texts, that I believe the 144,000 are inclusive of those who were chosen by Jesus as his followers. All Christians, in fact, that it's a number that represents all of Christians. That the 12 tribes listed for the 144,000 are the 12 tribes that James greets as scattered about. They are all Israel that is saved in addition to the Gentiles, according to Romans 8, as the Gentiles are grafted in. It's a spiritual Israel. It's an Israelite circumcised of the heart, not of the flesh. So, applying this illustration to the 144,000, all Christians who are distinct from the great crowd and the great crowd of nations in Matthew 25 and Revelation 7, right, who don't know who Christ's brothers are, but who treat them well anyway. And so for that reason, they're treated as sheep who are then brought into the new earth, over whom Jesus and the 144,000, all Christians, rule as kings. And it says in Revelation 7, he guides the Lamb in whose blood the great crowd, all those nations, washed their robes in, right? Because they weren't Christians. He's choosing them on the basis of how they treat the Christians, because that effectively is them treating him the same way. So they wash their robes and make them white in the blood of the Lamb, and he guides them to fountains of waters of life in Revelation chapter 7. It's only later, after the 1,000-year reign, after the devil is destroyed, that in Revelation 21, New Jerusalem descends, and God not only wipes out every tear from their eye, like in Revelation 7, as they're being guided to fountains of waters of life. They haven't reached them yet, because they're washing their robes and making them white. But in Revelation 21, death is no more, right? We've now achieved that point, or they have achieved that point. All of us have achieved that point where the former things have passed away, right? So applying the 144,000 to all Christians, what's been happening to all Christians to this point? Well, they've been living and dying, haven't they? They've been sleeping with God. Their spirit returns to the God who gave it, until he gives it a body. When what? When Jesus descends from heaven. Let's go to it real quickly. 1 Thessalonians 4. He descends from heaven with a commanding call, with the trumpet, the last trumpet, right? That sounds when the resurrection is occurring. Trumpet's not a part of your being, so it doesn't mean he's a trumpet. But your voice is a part of your being. I've talked about this in my Michael and Jesus as the Biblical Archangel videos. He descends with the commanding call, the trumpet of God, and the voice of the archangel to do what? Let's read it real quickly here. This is what we tell you by Jehovah's word. I don't believe Jehovah should be used here. As I mentioned a moment ago, there are some instances in the New Testament where I don't agree with the NWT, but I agree with far more in the overall Bible than in Bibles who don't use it. That we, the living, who survive to the presence of the Lord, shall in no way precede those who have fallen asleep in death. Because the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a commanding call, with an archangel's voice, and with God's trumpet, and those who are dead in union with Christ will rise first. Afterward, we, the living who are surviving, will together with them be caught away in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and thus we shall always be with the Lord. So how does this apply to the illustration of the vineyard workers? Well, those who survive to the end, who are surviving when Jesus descends with that call, with that trumpet, and with that voice of the archangel, don't die. Right? They're at the end. They're at the end of the day in the illustration of the vineyard workers. They're the ones at the very end time who don't have to spend all day, in the illustration part, living and dying and waiting, sleeping with God. Remember, like in Revelation 6:11, it says, how long, O sovereign Lord, will you wait before avenging our blood? And they're told to rest a little while longer, right? See, they're waiting, sleeping with God, living to Him. But the time that is passed is much longer, and the fact that they had to die, right, like working all day, is comparable in this situation, because the workers who worked all day expect more, do they not? In the illustration of Matthew 20 and the vineyard workers, because they went through more. They endured the burning heat, but yet the pay is the same. Just like when the Son of Man arrives in his Father's glory with all the angels and descends with the voice of the archangel, those who are last are treated the same by being caught away to be with the Lord, to reign with him in heaven on his Father's throne, Revelation 2 and 3, for the 1,000 years. The pay is the same, even though those who lived and died and who slept for a lot longer time went through the pain of death, are given the same reward as those who are still alive, but who are caught away to be with the Lord and to reign with him, as I said. So the reward is the same, but those who were chosen and who worked while they were alive and then died and slept with the Father longer might feel as though they went through more in such a way that they could say, we thought we'd be given more. But it's the Master's choice to say what the pay is, not just for the first, but also for the last. And in the coming age, when Jesus descends, to gather the last with the first, they will be treated just the same.